But is there any evidence that one's bodily position during sleep or the orientation of the feet relative to the head, the angle elevated or upward or downward, has any impact on the pattern of different sleep stages or quality or any other aspects of sleep?
There is a reason for it. And we'll probably come on to this at some point when we speak about different methods for sleep optimization or the new wave of fascinating sleep enhancement tools has to do with temperature, we think. That for you to be able to fall asleep and stay asleep, you have to drop your brain and body temperature by just a little less than about 1 degree Celsius, or probably 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's the reason, by the way, that you will always find it easier to fall asleep in a room that's too cold than too hot. Because the room that's too cold is at least taking you in the right temperature direction for good sleep. Whereas the room that's too hot, the opposite. It turns out that the body's ability to dissipate heat, what we call thermoregulation here, and thermoregulation in one direction, which is the reduction in core body temperature, is superior when you are lying down versus when you are inclined versus when you are standing up.
Really?
And in part, it has to do with the distribution of blood throughout certain parts of the brain in the distal versus proximal regions, meaning sort of the regions that are closer to the core of your body versus the regions that are further away. But your body's ability, if we largely take most items of clothes off you, and then we measure the core body temperature, and the way that we do this, it's a delightful technique. It's called a rectal probe. And it's neither pleasant necessarily for the installation of the experimenter doing it, and it's certainly not necessarily for the participant. But putting that aside for a second, we can measure your core body temperature, and we can measure using temperature sensors all over your body exactly what's going on with the blood flow. And we can measure how the brain is starting to dissipate the heat, because one of the principal ways that we dissipate heat from our body is by moving blood around the body. When we bring blood into the core of our body, we're trapping it in the core, and our core body temperature increases. When we push that blood out to the surface, it goes to these thin sort of capillaries and vessels on the surface of your skin, and you start to dissipate that heat, and you dissipate it more quickly, so your core body temperature drops. And the body's sort of vasoactive capacity for distributing that blood and then releasing that trapped heat from the core of the body is superior when you are lying down. And therefore, your body temperature can drop more quickly, which is one of the many reasons why it's not as easy to fall asleep when you're sort of at a 45-degree angle, and why the quality of your sleep won't be as good. Now, there are other reasons too, just as you mentioned. But coming back to position, I would say that there's perhaps at least 2 pieces of evidence that would recommend positional differences or positional changes. The first is very obvious. If you are someone who is snoring, and certainly if you have untreated sleep apnea, which is where you're sort of not just snoring, but you'll have an absence of breath. That's what the word apnea means. Here's another one with an A in front of it. Pnea, sort of, you've heard of pneumonia, and this is about breath. And apnea is about an absence of that breath. And with sleep apnea, not only do you start to have an airway collapsing partially, and that's where you get that flutter, and that's the sound of the flutter that we're having. But then at some point, you just hear silence. At that point, the person stopped breathing entirely, absence of breath. That is much more likely to happen if you are sleeping on your back, because when you're sleeping on your back, your airway is giving way to gravity, which is wanting to pull the airway down and close it and shut it off. So one of the suggestions for people who have snoring or sleep apnea is trying as best you can to train yourself out of sleeping on your back. Now, there's lots of gadgets out there that can sort of help and ways you can do that. The old school way that we used to do it, sleep apnea is more common in men than it is in women, but women still have it. But if you had a male, you would bring them into the clinic and you would say, could you, it's often males who perhaps are carrying excessive body weight, and so they're of larger mass size. You'd say, can you also bring a t-shirt in of your wife? And it has to be a t-shirt that has a pocket on the front. And then we would ask them to wear the t-shirt back to front. So it's a very tight-fitting t-shirt. It's back to front. And then you took a tennis ball or a hockey ball in the back pocket. And as you're lying there in bed and you turn over onto your back, you get this painful signal of the tennis ball pushing you in the back, and it gradually. I know.
Who came up with this? Is this Matt? Was this Matt Walker's idea?
This is not me. I am not.
It's clever.
Yeah, but I should now be on social media. I should be changed to sort of like sleep torturer rather than sleep diplomat. So that's one recommendation. Try to stay clear. If you're asking me, are there certain positions we should stay away from in that circumstance? Yes, it would be. The other comes back to something I mentioned during deep sleep, when this cleansing system starts to kick into gear in your brain and wash away these toxins from the day. What we've found a little bit of evidence, and we in the Royal We, because like you, my lab doesn't do animal research where we only do human research, but some animal researchers had discovered that when animals will sleep with their head on the side, the cleansing capacity of the brain is superior than when the animal is sleeping on its back or sleeping on its front. And in fact, if you look, and you would love this project, if you go onto Google and you just search for sleeping animals, look at the head position. And I will guarantee you that many of them, if they're naturalistic, are animals with their head turned to the side. Now, the cute ones, the funny ones, are when a kitten is splayed out on its back and its head is back. That's how someone with sleep apnea would sort of sleep on their back. But that's very rare. We almost never see that. So it's very interesting. And what they found was that when those heads were in those sort of side positions, the cleansing mechanism of the brain was a little bit better. It wasn't night or day. It's not as though, oh my goodness, I'm a front sleeper and, I'm not getting any brain cleansing, or I'm a back sleeper. I'm not saying that. There's no need to take it to the extreme. But I don't think there's any good evidence yet in humans that, firstly, that's the case, and nor is there strong enough evidence to make any recommendations. But I just bring it up because it's in the data and it's starting to emerge that if you were to ask me about sleeping position and are there any recommendations, those are the two pieces of descriptive advice I would give you. They are not prescriptive pieces of advice.